you led a 3,400 plus mile dog sled expedition of Antarctica. And a motivation for doing this, as I understood, was to raise awareness in the public mind and ultimately in the political policymakers' minds of the need to ban mining and oil exploration in Antarctica. Walk us through the origins of that trip, and then we'll talk a little bit about what actually happened, which, as I understood it, resulted in President Bush, H.W. Bush at the time, who obviously is himself very much an oil and gas man, making a pretty monumental decision.
Yeah. Well, it actually started in 1960 during the Cold War. Antarctica was set aside an amazing treaty called the Antarctic Treaty. So it was set aside for science only, international cooperation, open inspections, no military, no nuclear. But they had a clause that in 1990 they would review the treaty in case there's something that they couldn't foresee would come up. And back in 1960, of course, the minerals seemed like they would last forever. There wasn't any issue with minerals at all. But then when it came for the review of the treaty, actually in 1986, behind closed doors, the 27 treaty nations decided to, in a formal document called the Wellington Convention, decided that they would open up Antarctica through that treaty, that review in 1990 for mineral exploration, which basically would be the beginning of end of that environment. But also in the later 80s, we were aware that climate change was happening. But we didn't have data. There wasn't enough science, and we needed more science in Antarctica. So if this went in the direction of mineral exploration, all that research would have gone into commercial direction, and we wouldn't have the data we would need that for the policies that we now have. So I was leading at that time in 1986 an unsupported expedition to the North Pole, 50 dogs, 5 dog teams, 8 people. And I literally ran into one other guy that was out there, John Louis Etienne, who was a Frenchman doing a solo. And it was on that evening after I met him, I went to his tent, and of course we talked about our present expedition, but we talked about our next expedition. I had a map of Antarctica with me, and I showed him the long route, and he was a French physician, and he was really captivated by just the magnitude of even the idea of crossing it the long route. But we talked about what we were doing in 86 was a personal best, and we wanted to do something more than that. And we both knew at that time, because we kept up with polar affairs, we knew that the Antarctica, that they had agreed to open it up. So we formed this international expedition, 16 members from the 6 main signees of the original Antarctic Treaty, basically the 6 countries that really held sway in the beginning, which was Japan, China, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, France, and the U.S. So we formed this expedition, trained, raised $8 million, and then crossed it on this incredible route. It was a 227-day trip, journeys. We almost perished a number of times along the way. We laid out caches, and some of the caches we couldn't find. But the expedition did what we wanted to do. It caught the fascination of the whole globe. We had over half the world following us, and this was before the internet. And then
I saw you had 2.5 billion media impressions. Like, where were you generating this awareness? Was this in magazines? Was this on, did you have video, like footage of the trip as well? Like, explain a little bit more about the awareness you were able to generate in 1989, 1990 in this regard.
Yeah, it's a good question, because we had a professional film crew from France, climbers that were used to this type of climate. They came in 5 different times, and logistically getting them in there was difficult. But we needed the images so we could garner a following. But the impressions were made mainly through TV and radio. We had a majority of China following us. China had one half an hour where the whole country watches that half an hour. We were consistently on there. And on the need, we were talking about the need for more science. So when we finished the expedition, we had 15 million kids that followed us. This is pre-internet. But when we finished in March of 1990, then we did a tour for about 6 months around the globe and met with the world presidents, because we had to have all 27 treaty signees. They had to reverse their decision. If one abstained, it was a no-go. So it was like a poker game. We landed our ship, Soviet ship from Antarctica, landed in Australia. We got the Prime Minister of Australia. So that was one card in the hand. And then we got President Mitterrand, and there we got the Prime Minister of Japan, the President of China. And we ended up getting all the signees except for George Bush, and he abstained. And because he abstained, it was a no-go. So they reconvened the year later, and the reason he abstained is that his chief of staff was Sununu, who was an anti-environmentalist Republican from Massachusetts, and he kept all this information away from the president. He was not aware of everything that was going on, but he voted again against it. But we were able to get him a letter. We did a lot of politicking in the Congress for a whole year, and then he realized, that this was an opportunity for himself in the United States, and he signed on board them in '91. So essentially, what it did,
I read somewhere that said that in order for you to get his sort of attention, you needed to reframe the issue away from global warming or climate change or environmentalism and reframe it more as an international cooperation initiative. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we did. I mean, when we met the president, we were told that's what you're to talk about. And you're not when you're doing diplomacy, you're not yelling and shouting. You've got to follow a certain protocol of respect, and you have to go for the long run. And it was the international cooperation that really captivated its interest. But of course, in the 1990s, you did not talk about climate change or global warming. I mean, that was just something. If you want to shut down the conversation, but we knew we needed that data for climate change because we needed science.